waves were huge, and while the four other crew members had already
Hey
gone
guys,
below to try to
welcome
get some
back.
sleep, Sam and Michael were now on the deck, doing their best to try to secure everything before they went down below. And so as the wind is whipping and the waves are smashing against the side of this boat, Sam and Michael decide they should split up to work more efficiently, where Sam will go to the front of the boat and Michael will go to the back of the boat, and they would each kind of work towards the middle of the boat, checking all the fastenings and the knots to make sure everything was good, and then when they reached the center, they would be good, and they could go down below. And so they did that. Sam went to the front, Michael to the back, and as they began to work, they kept constant eye contact with each other because this was obviously a very dangerous thing they were doing. But at some point, as Sam was making his way, he had to duck down to check a particular fastening. And so when he ducked down,
Go
he
check
lost
out
sight of
Mr.
Michael
Ballin,
just for a second. But
B-A-L-L-E-N.
in that split second, this huge rogue wave smashed the side of the boat, practically capsizing it, sending Sam flying towards the railing. But Sam luckily grabbed onto the railing before being thrown into the water. And then as the boat kind of began to rock back to level, Sam instinctively looked back down the ship to look for Michael, and he watched through the darkness and the rain as Michael went careening off the side into the ocean. He hadn't been able to grab onto anything. And so the instant the boat kind of leveled out again, Sam screamed for Michael, but he couldn't see him, and so he ran down below, woke up the whole crew, and so moments later, the crew was on the deck. They had their big spotlights out, scanning the water, through this big storm, looking for signs of Michael, and at the same time, the captain had come up, and he was on the radio talking to police. And so several minutes later, a police boat managed to come out to the fishing boat, and at the same time, the crew is still desperately looking for Michael. They haven't found him yet, and now the police began circling around the whole area, calling out for Michael, throwing out buoys into the water in hopes of, maybe Michael sees one and grabs hold. But nobody could find Michael. He was just gone. And so all that morning into the early afternoon, the police continued to look in the area for Michael. The crew on board the fishing boat did the same thing, but still nobody could find a trace of Michael. And so around noon that day, the search was called off, and the police told Sam and the rest of the crew of this fishing boat that unfortunately, at this point, it seemed very likely that Michael had drowned. And so, of course, Sam and the rest of the crew were basically in shock. I mean, this happened so quickly. How could it be that, Michael just a few hours ago was joking around with them, part of the crew, and now he's dead? I mean, it was just unbelievable. But now, unfortunately, Sam and the rest of the crew had to basically put their grief aside and make a very practical, albeit very cold, decision, which was, even though Michael's dead, do we stay out here and continue fishing? Or because of his death, do we just go back home? And you might think that decision was actually super easy to make. That of course, they would pack it in and go back home. How could you possibly stay out here and go fishing, considering what had happened? But you need to understand, it cost a lot of money to go out on these fishing excursions, and they had just left, and so they had not caught anything. So they had spent all this money, and they had no return from it. And these fishermen were not wealthy. In fact, honestly, they needed the money from this trip just to provide for their families. And so if they did turn around right now, I mean, it would really hurt all of them, and it would also make it really hard to get the funding again to go out later. And so after some pretty awkward deliberation, the crew decided that, you know what, we gotta stay out here and fish.
Oh, hold on. I'll be a rock bot. Hey, rock bot, rock bot.
Nothing. Channel 1110. Special report with Brett Gaynor. Season number 2024. Episode number 178. Press down to review options.
Hold on. Baby daddy long legs. Baby brown recluse. You idiots. Our brown recluse is deadly. Rarely fatal. Are there any spiders that are deadly?
But the silver lining was, hey, if we stay out here for another day or so, maybe Michael's body will float to the surface and we can at least recover him and bring him back home to his family. And so all day that day, the fishermen stayed out and fished, and they were very successful. I mean, one after another, they were catching these cod that were 6 feet long and nearly 100 pounds. They're called flowery cods. But despite how incredible this was for their business, this was not a cause for celebration because they had just lost a friend the day before. And so it was a very somber day, and all day, all the fishermen really are looking out at the water, hoping to see Michael's body. But, by the end of that 24 hours of fishing, they didn't see any sign of Michael, and so they packed everything in, and they headed back to port. They sold off all of the cod that they had bought, and then each of the fishermen went back to their families and grieved the loss of their friend. A few days later, a factory worker was standing in front of a fish processing line with this huge 97-pound cod right in front of them. This is one of the flowery cods that Sam and the other fishermen had caught 24 hours after their friend had gone overboard. So this worker took their knife, and like they did every day all day long, began opening up this fish. And at some point, after cutting it open, looking inside of this enormous cod, the worker just stopped and couldn't believe what they were seeing, and then they began to scream. It would turn out, a few days earlier, after Michael had been thrown overboard during the storm, he very likely had been alive when he hit the water. But the area where they were fishing off the coast of Queensland, Australia, was known for having lots of sharks and saltwater crocodiles in the area. And so pretty much immediately, Michael was attacked by either a shark or a crocodile, or maybe both. And during this feeding frenzy, as Michael's getting ripped to pieces, his head got ripped off and began to float away. And at some point, one of those huge flowery cods saw the head and ate it whole. And then later that day, Michael's colleagues caught the cod who caught Michael's head. And so that factory worker who opened up that particular cod saw Michael's undigested head looking up at her, and apparently his face was fixed in terror, with his eyes wide and his mouth open, as if his final moment had been him screaming.
That sucks, dude.
Some of you might know that before I became a professional, strange, dark, and mysterious storyteller, I was in the military. And while I was in the military, I definitely had some pretty wild experiences all over the world. But to be honest, what I remember most about my time in service was not any of my own exploits, but rather it was the insane stories I heard from other service members. Keep in mind, military service members are sent to some of the most isolated, desolate, inhospitable places in the world, and many times in those places, weird things happen. Unexplainable things, like borderline paranormal things happen in these places. Think being out in the middle of the ocean with absolutely nothing around, and seeing lights popping up in the sky and coming out of the ocean, and seeing figures up on the mountains wandering around where there shouldn't be any people. I mean, there are insane stories out there from service members, but many of them are not necessarily told in the public. They're kind of kept within the military. It's like kind of part of military lore. That is the premise of wartime stories. And if that piques your interest, well, you're in luck, because not only can you right now go check out the Wartime Stories YouTube channel, but also I personally hand-selected wartime stories to come under the Ballin Studios umbrella, and we have collaborated to make a brand new weekly podcast, the official Wartime Stories podcast, which is available right now. Go look up the Wartime Stories podcast on any podcast platform. It's free. All you have to do is look up Ballin Studios, and you'll find Wartime Stories that way, or you can direct search for Wartime Stories click on it, follow them, and give them a listen. It's an amazing weekly show with new episodes coming out every single Monday. Okay, back to the story. With new episodes coming out every single Monday. Okay, back to the story. On the afternoon of July 13th, 1994, a man woke up feeling very confused and disoriented and felt some pain in the back of his head. And as he opened his eyes, he kind of slowly realized that he was on his back in a ditch on the side of the road, looking up at a big blue sky. The man tried to sit up, but as soon as he did, he felt this throbbing pain in the back of his head, and he reached back to touch it, but the second he did, it hurt even worse, and he definitely felt there was a pretty big lump on the back of his head. And then when he brought his hands in front of his face, he saw he had all these bruises around his wrists that he had no idea what they were from. And so as this man in the ditch is trying to figure out what's going on, suddenly this older man who he didn't know just appeared by the side of the road and looked down and said, "Hey, are you okay?" And so the guy in the ditch is looking at this guy, he's got no idea who he is, and he wants to say, "What's going on? Where am I? Who am I? What's happening?" But he couldn't find the words. It's like he just kept looking at this older guy, looking at his wrists and feeling his head and having no idea what's going on. But then for some reason, 3 names popped into this guy's head, the guy in the ditch. He thought of 3 names. He had no idea whose names these were, but for some reason he felt like those names were really important. And so after a few minutes of awkward silence, as the guy in the ditch is trying to talk, he finally just blurts out these 3 names. He says, Pat, Joel, Chris. And so the older man who had asked the guy in the ditch what was going on, he didn't know how to react to this guy blurting out these names, and so he kind of ignored it and just said, "Okay, hi, my name's Steve." And then Steve, the older man, helped the guy from the ditch out of the ditch. And then once the man in the ditch was on his feet, kind of looking around, he looked at Steve, and suddenly he could say other words. And he said to Steve, "Where are we?" And Steve looked at him and said, "We're in Cheyenne, Wyoming." Now, the guy in the ditch didn't know why, but he immediately felt like Wyoming had to be wrong. Like, there's no way he could be in Wyoming. But the guy in the ditch didn't know where he was supposed to be. He didn't know who Steve was. He didn't know who Pat, Joel, or Chris was. And so it's all totally confusing. And so he just stood there kind of saying nothing. And as he did, Steve said, "Hold on a minute." And so Steve kind of shuffled down the road like 10, 20 feet away. There was a cart full of cans, and there was a backpack and some other things dangling off the side. And as Steve grabbed the shopping cart, turned it around, and slowly began pushing it back towards the guy in the ditch, the guy in the ditch stared at Steve and kind of put together that, Steve must be homeless. And this realization made the guy in the ditch think that, maybe he was homeless too. And so suddenly, instinctively, the guy from the ditch began reaching into his pockets, thinking maybe he had an idea or something that would show him who he was, that would show he was not homeless, that he had a place that he needed to go to. He reached in his pockets, but there was nothing. All he found was 23 cents and a comb. And so by the time Steve came over with his cart and asked the guy from the ditch, "Hey, do you want to come to the shelter with me?" the guy from the ditch was like, "Okay, yeah, I'll go with you." And then once the guy from the ditch and Steve arrived at the shelter, when they went inside, the guy from the ditch had to introduce himself to the people who ran the shelter. And so he made up a name, combining one of those names that was running through his head, Pat, with the color of the desk of the person who was asking him for his name inside of the shelter. And so he just called himself Pat Brown. And after Pat Brown got a room inside of the shelter, he went to bed that night, still having no idea what was going on, but he felt confident, if I just sleep tonight, I'll wake up tomorrow, and I'll know what's going on. I'll figure out, what happened to me. But the next day, when Pat woke up, he was still completely confused, did not know who he was, had no idea what was going on, but he had the wherewithal to know that, something bad must have happened to him, and maybe he should go talk to the police, because maybe they would know if other people were looking for him or something. And so Pat walked from the shelter to the police station. It was not far away. And he went inside, and very politely, he walked up to the desk. He introduced himself to the cop who was on duty, and Pat just began explaining to the cop as much as he could remember. He said, yesterday I woke up in a ditch. I don't know who I am. I don't know why I'm here. I think I have amnesia. I just keep thinking of 3 names in my head, Pat, Joel, and Chris, but I have no idea what they mean. Can you help me? Now, the cop who's hearing this did not think, "Oh my goodness, this is totally legitimate. Let's start an investigation to figure out who you are." Instead, the cop is like, "Is this guy on drugs? Is he mentally ill? What's going on with this guy?" But the cop would say, Pat was incredibly polite and did not appear to be intoxicated, And so the cop humored him and said, okay, you know what? Let's look through the most recent missing person reports in the area to see if somebody matching your description, is a missing person. And so the cop began going through the database, but he couldn't find anybody that matched Pat's description. And so at some point he said, look, I can't really help you very much here because you're a grown man, distracted, and even though it's very unfortunate that you can't remember who you are or where you need to go or, where your family is, that's not really a police matter. But as he was saying this to Pat, who's kind of crestfallen, he's putting his hands near his face and just kind of reacting to this news that the police are not going to help him. And the police officer says, hold on a minute, look at your hand. And so Pat looked at his hand, and he saw, there was no ring on his left ring finger, but there was a pretty obvious callus where a ring should have been. It looked like, Pat must have been wearing a ring up until recently, and for some reason it was now off. And so the cop said, hey, it looks like you may be married, or were married for a long time, because you got that callus. But, beyond that, I'm sorry, there's not much else I can offer you. And so even though this was somewhat valuable information, it didn't really point Pat in any direction. And so he was about to turn and leave when the cop said, hey, do you want to ride to the hospital? Because it seems like you could be having some sort of medical event here. But Pat politely declined and just told the officer to please be in touch with him if anybody came calling looking for somebody that kind of seemed like him. And the police officer said he would. And so after this, Pat left the station and went back to the shelter and basically told himself, I'm going to stay here until I leave. At this point, that was kind of all he could do. However, weeks would go by at the shelter, and nobody would contact the police looking for somebody like Pat Brown, and Pat wouldn't remember any more details. The only thing that kept coming into his head was those three names, Pat, Joel, and Chris. But that was it. And so finally, after a few weeks of no progress being made, Pat decided he would leave the shelter in Cheyenne and go to Jackson, Wyoming, because some other people in the shelter talked about Jackson, Wyoming as being a place where people who don't have ID cards could get jobs and basically start over. And because Jackson was only a little over 400 miles away from Cheyenne, it was not unreasonable to try to hitchhike your way to Jackson. And so almost exactly 2 months from the day Pat woke up inside of this ditch, he began hitchhiking his way towards Jackson. And then when Pat got to Jackson, he was able to get a job without an ID. He got a job at a newspaper, sorting mail and doing some clerical work. And at first he stayed in the shelter like he had in Cheyenne until he had saved up enough money to rent a room. And as the months went by in Jackson, Pat did begin to remember additional details about what seemed like his former life. He discovered while doing clerical work at the newspaper that he was able to use an adding machine with He discovered while doing clerical work at the newspaper that he was able to use an adding machine without looking at it. It was like his fingers just knew where to go. He also discovered that he was able to do really complex math problems in his head. And then also, in virtue of being at the newspaper, he saw a lot of information about the stock market, and he actually seemed to know a lot about the stock market, even though he didn't know why. Also, while Pat was in Jackson, he started to feel this really intense compulsion to go to a Catholic church. And so he began going to Catholic Mass, and while he was in church, he just automatically began saying the prayers along with everybody else, even though, again, he didn't really know why he had that information in his head. But the biggest clue that came back to Pat while he was in Jackson was this recurring dream he would have, where he was at this campground somewhere, and this little boy comes around the corner and looks up at Pat and says, hey, Dad, Mom needs your help with Chris. And then in the dream, he responds to this child by saying, okay, Joel, I'll be right there. And so with all these clues kind of coming back into focus, Pat sort of felt like he had a grip on who he used to be. Based on the callus on his finger and on that recurring dream, it did seem like he was a married man who had at least 2 kids, Joel and Chris, and so his wife was very likely named Pat, or maybe Pat was another child he didn't know. And then also he felt like he must have been maybe an accountant or somebody who worked with numbers, based on the adding machine and understanding the stock market and complex math problems. And also he was a devout Catholic, because that's the only way he would know all those prayers. But despite kind of putting together who he seemed to be in his previous life, that didn't really tell him anything about what he should do now. Like, he didn't know where his potential family was, or where his job was, or where he should go. And so even though he had this kind of former life formed in his mind, he couldn't act on it. And so Pat's weird life in limbo in Jackson, Wyoming, just kind of continued to drag on. And so by the end of 1997, so by this point it's been 3.5 years, he's woken up in the ditch confused. He's still in Jackson, Wyoming. He still has no idea who he is. And it's starting to set in that unless he takes drastic measures here, he'll never figure out the truth about who he is.
You fucking idiot.
Rated T.
What?
No, you fucking niggers.
Rated M for mature. An Xfinity Rewards perk.
What's up, everybody?
You know what? Let me look something up right quick. If you have a tumor and you apply pressure on it, does that hurt? Oh, okay.
Akeem here in today's Fix of Entertainment news. We've got some Jurassic World Rebirth news, and Chucky's coming to late night. That's right, all on today's Fix. Presented by Universal Orlando Resort. And we got our first look at Jurassic World Rebirth, the 7th film in the franchise, taking place 5 years after the events of Jurassic World Dominion. The movie starring Scarlett Johansson and Jonathan Bailey will see humanity living in a world where the planet's ecology has proven inhospitable to dinosaurs. And the official synopsis reads, quote, "Those remaining exist in isolated equatorial environments with climates resembling the one in which they once thrived. The 3 most colossal creatures within the tropical biosphere hold the key to a drug that will bring miraculous life-saving benefits to humankind." Wow. Now, Scarlett Johansson's character is a covert ops specialist hired to lead a team to extract some of that dino DNA from the few that still live. Now, a seemingly impossible task that apparently becomes even more complicated when her and her crew get stranded on an island, discovering a sinister secret that's been hidden from the world for decades. Now, what is that secret? Who knows? I don't know. Now, we'll have to wait and see and find out when the movie hits theaters July of next year. And if you're wondering if the franchise is in good hands, well, Steven Spielberg, Dennis L. Stewart, and Jim Spencer are executive producers on the film, with Gareth Edwards directing from a script penned by the writer of the 1993 original movie Jurassic Park. Now, they might have themselves a smash hit on their hands, but who knows? Comment down below your thoughts. In other news, live from Halloween Horror Nights, it's Late Night with Chucky. That's right, folks. Running select nights at Universal Studios Hollywood from September 5th through November 3rd. The good guy
So, early in 1998, Pat does take drastic measure. He contacts a very popular TV show at the time called Unsolved Mysteries and asks them to please cover his story, because if they did, it would be broadcast across the country and maybe somebody out there would recognize him and come find him. And sure enough, when Pat contacted Unsolved Mysteries, they thought his story was totally insane and they covered it. Pat's episode aired on April 10th, 1998. almost exactly 4 years after Pat woke up in that ditch. And on the day his episode aired, in a city in Indiana, 1,500 miles away from Jackson, Wyoming, a phone rang in a woman's house. So she answered it, and it was her cousin, and her cousin told her, stop whatever you're doing and turn on the TV. Put it on channel CBS. And so this woman, she walks into the living room, she turns on the TV, flips it to CBS, and she sees an episode of Unsolved Mysteries is playing, and it's Pat Brown's episode. And this woman is staring at the TV, and she practically faints when she sees what it's about. But she stays composed and just stands there staring at the TV, so shocked she can't even say anything. And the whole time her cousin is yelling through the phone, saying, can you believe it? Oh my goodness. And then at some point on the TV, a phone number flashed at the bottom of the screen where the producers of the show told the audience, hey, if you know anything about this case, call this number. And so with this, the woman who's watching the TV, she hangs up on her cousin and she dials that number she sees on the TV. Pat's drastic decision to call Unsolved Mysteries would indeed solve the mystery of who he was. However, the truth about who Pat was is not what you think. It would turn out some of the clues that Pat had sort of naturally recalled in those 4 years that he was kind of figuring out who he was were indeed clues of his former life. He really was a married father. Those 3 names, Pat, Joel, and Chris, those were the names of his wife and his 2 sons. Pat was his wife, and Joel and Chris were his 2 sons. And he really was a devout Catholic, which is why he was able to remember all of those prayers. But some of the other clues he thought of over those 4 years, like his incredible aptitude for math, or the fact that he could use an adding machine without looking, or the fact that he understood the stock market so easily, those were clues about his former life, but specifically, they were clues about why Pat was in this position in the first place. It would turn out Pat Brown was actually a man named Carl Brodnick Jr. And Carl Brodnick Jr. was a wanted felon who had misappropriated tens of thousands of dollars from the advertising agency where he worked as an agent. And Carl had been under serious criminal investigation when he suddenly disappeared from his home in Indiana on July 8, 1994, which is 5 days before Pat Brown woke up in that ditch on the side of the road, with a lump on his head, markings on his wrist, and having no idea who he was or what happened to him. Now, there has never been a perfect explanation for what actually happened to Carl, but if you think about it logically, his claim of having amnesia is very interesting. Why would a guy use amnesia as his cover story to shine Wyoming and say, I don't know who I am, I don't know what happened to me, only to then, a few years later, go on national TV and out himself and totally make himself a target for the police? It doesn't make any sense. And then also adding credibility to this idea that maybe something happened to Carl versus Carl running off to save himself is we know that when Carl disappeared on July 8, 1994 from his home in Indiana, he took out $1,000 in cash from his checking account and then also took out another large sum of cash from his home's second mortgage. However, when he woke up in that ditch, all the money was gone. He just had $20. Now, after Carl vanished from his house in Indiana, police did go looking for him because he was under criminal investigation, so they wanted to find him. And they pretty quickly found his car 250 miles away from his home in a strip mall parking lot in Missouri, but there was no sign of Carl anywhere. And then right after the police found his car, they checked Carl's credit card, and they discovered it had just been used in Colorado, so 900 miles away, to buy clothes. But when they went to that store and tried to find security footage of, when that transaction took place, there was no footage. And so there was no way of knowing if Carl really was the guy in Colorado making that transaction, or if somebody else had his credit card. And then after that, there were no other leads. Nobody had any idea what happened to Carl. His family didn't know, the police had nothing to go on, and so very quickly his case went cold. Until 4 years later, when that episode of Unsolved Mysteries aired. Now, there are many theories about what could have happened to Carl, but the leading theory, and again, it's just a theory, is that Carl may have been in debt to some very dangerous people. And so when he fled his home in Indiana, it's very likely that he was not running from the law, even though he was under criminal investigation. He was actually running from these dangerous people. And that the reason he might have been stealing from his company was to pay off these dangerous people. Apparently it wasn't enough. Hence why he decided to kind of take off and run away. And these dangerous people seemed to have caught up to him, and they captured him, and it looked like they tied his wrists at some point because of the marks on his wrists, and they very likely tortured him or something, hence why he had this very serious head injury, and then it seems like they dumped him on the side of the road, very likely to die. They might have thought he was dead already, but he didn't die, and when he came that chased him down. Again, that's just a theory. When Carl's episode of Unsolved Mysteries aired, it was his wife, Pat Rodnick, who was the one who saw him on TV and couldn't believe it and called it in. And then when she called this in, at first, Carl was reunited with his family. And it was this big, happy reunion. Carl comes back home, he sees his wife and his kids, and then he's immediately arrested and prosecuted for embezzlement. Now, ultimately, Carl would plead guilty to the charges against him, but he would say the whole time, I don't remember committing this crime. I don't remember anything. And so ultimately, Carl did not get sent to prison. He instead served time on probation, and then after it was over, he just went back to living as Carl Rodnick Jr., despite still having huge gaps in his memory, at least according to
Fucker.
Mysterious, you come to the right place.
Oh shit.
I have this mantra. Do things that scare you. I am doing a full-blown tour across the United States. How do you feel? Oh, terrible. That's why it's a privilege to have the opportunity to stand in front of people who have chosen to be here. Just to listen to me. I want the people in the audience to be drawn into the stories I'm telling the same way they are at home. So that's going to do it. If you want more Strange, Dark, and Mysterious content, remember, we have a whole slew of Strange, Dark, and Mysterious podcasts that are free to listen to right now. All you have to do is go to any podcast platform and type in Ballin Studios, and you'll see there's the Mr. Ballin podcast. Besides the outbreak itself, Operation Cobalt, also known as the Sunset Protocol, was one of the most devastating events to occur in the Walking Dead universe. In the beginning stages of the outbreak, Operation Cobalt commenced in the early morning of August 28, 2010, and ended on September 10th of the same year, with the U.S. military dropping napalm on most metropolitan cities in America and presumably Canada. 2 days after the outbreak went global, martial law was declared in America across all 50 states by the federal government in the morning hours of August 27th. The following day, the beginning phases of Operation Cobalt would commence. Initially, the protocol was designed to actually take the cities back from the dead by hand, with National Guards being deployed and overseas troops being recalled. As we see from the first season of Fear the Walking Dead, military units were deployed across the states to set up designated safe zones within suburban areas. Anyone lucky enough to be already inside one of these safe zones by the time the soldiers showed up would be placed under protection from the initial chaos of society collapsing. These safe zones would be set up in easily defendable areas and would include fences around the entire perimeter, in-home medical treatment, given the patient has not suffered a bite or scratch, in which they would be taken away and put down, and soldiers on perimeter watch around the clock. It sounds good in theory. Soldiers that found themselves within a safe zone would be subject to orders by the military commanders, and forcibly removed and relocated if seen as a liability to the safety of the zone. And this happened a lot more than you would think. Even signs of depression would be seen as a liability to the morale of the safe zone.
That's right. The military would remove you from what's left of your family if you showed signs of depression. In the fucking apocalypse. And unfortunately, most of these civilians would never be seen again. Funny enough, the Alexandria Safe Zone and Campus Colony from World Beyond were initially set up as quarantine zones. During this 2-week period, US government officials would be evacuated to undisclosed areas. Presumably what would be the Commonwealth, Portland, Omaha, and the soon-to-be Civic Republic of Philadelphia, as those are some of the few densely populated areas to survive into the post-apocalypse. From August 28th to September 9th, 2010, the soldiers would clear their area sector by sector, terminating any walkers in the perimeter and venturing further out each day. Little to the knowledge of the civilians inside the safe zones, this cleansing also included the living, regardless of infection status. Everyone outside the safe zones was shot on sight. Eventually, the overwhelming numbers of the dead would become too much for the soldiers to face. So in the early morning of September 10th, 2010, the final stages of Operation Cobalt were enacted. Okay.
Fallout TV series business meeting.
Bud here has an idea for 3
Vault Tech
interconnected
Conspiracy Meeting
vaults.
Part 2.
But we need more ideas. We need
Awesome.
your ideas. Because it was the spirit of competition that made our companies great. I propose we bring that same spirit of competition to our solution. We have over 100 vaults spread across America. Enough for each of you to claim several, where you can play out your own ideas for how to create the perfect conditions for humanity. Whatever you want to do, no one needs to know. And may the best idea win.
We could intentionally overcrowd a vault so people have to compete to survive inside it.
We have been developing a robot that delivers milk to the front door. It's quite intelligent. I would like to see a vault.
What about using a vault to develop a superhuman soldier using illegal immigrants?
We could pump psychotropic drugs into the air supply.
We can separate parents and children, and only the smartest kids reach adulthood.
It's a fun idea. A lot of earning potential at the end of the world.
Rob Code.
We're talking about making a significant investment based on a hypothetical. How can we guarantee the results?
By dropping the bomb ourselves.
Wow. I was like, what the fuck when I first seen that shit. His own life. Poor guy.
Everything alright, Mr. Hood?
Fine. I'm fine, Betty.
He is so excited to meet you. A nuclear event would be a tragedy, but also an opportunity. Perhaps the greatest opportunity in history. Because when we are the only ones left, there will be no one to fight. A true monopoly.
Mr. Howard. Huge fan. Henry, but everyone calls me Hank.
Your father has been around for a very long time.
Fallout TV show is based in the California LA region. The once great nation of the New California Republic, or NCR, has completely collapsed, making California now comprised of many factions, including the Brotherhood of Steel, fighting to fill the power void. This leaves us to wonder about all the details that happened between Fallout New Vegas and the current timeline in the TV show. And a lot has changed in the 15 years since Fallout New Vegas, which is set in the year 2281. The TV show current year takes place in the year 2296. I believe that the current state of the Fallout world on the West Coast is because Mr. House winning at the end of the Fallout New Vegas video game is the canon storyline of the TV show. To explain this, we need to fill in a bit of context. Before the Great War of 2077, Moldaver was on the verge of creating cold fusion, a way to create limitless power and defuse the resource wars between the USA and China. However, Vault-Tec bought her company and shelved the project. This technology is later seen with Wills and defused the resource wars between the USA and China. However, Vault-Tec bought her company and shelved the project. This technology is However, Vault-Tec bought her company and shelved the project. This technology is later seen with Wilzig at the Enclave. As well, it is the Vault-Tec overseer, Hank McLean, that knows the code to activate it. This would mean that there was some type of coordination between the United States government, now known as the Enclave, and Vault-Tec. This is further supported by the fact that the US president had future knowledge of the war, even though Vault-Tec was the one that started it. Perhaps this mystery man seen towards the end of the show is in the mix of it as well. There is a lot that we don't know about who is actually behind everything. However, the show is tying Vault-Tec and the US government together in some type of a conspiracy much more than the games ever did. Vault-Tec and their cabal of corporations profited greatly from selling the end of the world, and they couldn't allow anything that would affect their bottom line. The United States had essentially fallen into full crony capitalism, with Vault-Tec at the center of all of it, using fear of the end of the world to sustain their power and profit margins. That is why they buried the cold fusion technology, because it was a threat to them. However, the longer time went without a nuclear war happening, Vault-Tec began to see a drop in their profits. This is where the plan is hatched to start the nuclear war themselves. The motivation of Vault-Tec to start the war is to eliminate their competition and have complete control over the surface after everything dies out. Overnight, Vault-Tec investments would be the only thing that is worth anything in the wasteland, having control of all the markets, governments, and people to form the world as they want to. And they even believe that in a twisted way, this is them bringing peace to the world. We do know that the Enclave wants to destroy everything in the wasteland because they believe they are all inferior. This is a major plot in the video games, so there may be some coordination between Vault-Tec and the Enclave in regards to this. However, this has not been completely revealed, and I'm sure we will learn more about their relationship in future seasons. This is the backdrop that leads us to Mr. House. The same Mr. House from the games is present at the meeting of corporations. This is a bit of a retcon. In the game, he clearly states he predicted the war through calculations and not from being a part of the planning.
By 2065, I deemed it a mathematical certainty that an unjustified war would devastate the Earth within 15 years. Every projection I ran confirmed it. I knew I couldn't save the world, nor did I care to, but I could save Vegas, and in the process, perhaps save mankind.
But either way, he would have prepared Las Vegas for the nuclear war, and things probably would have played out very similar to the way they did in the video game New Vegas. He has an army of robots that he uses to run New Vegas, and he tries to make it the center of wealth in the Mojave Desert. During the events of the Fallout New Vegas video game, there are three major factions fighting for power in the Mojave Desert, specifically around Las Vegas and the Hoover Dam. They are the NCR, Mr. House and his army of robots, and Caesar's Legion. The NCR is an old-world-style government that is probably the most stable and peaceful place in the entire wasteland. Caesar's Legion is a brutal war empire that bases their aesthetics off of the Roman Empire. Furthermore, the really just cares about the Las Vegas area and just wants control over it and to generate as much wealth for himself as possible. He isn't really necessarily good or bad, but more represents the cold-hearted corporation. All three of them have endings where they win the conflict and gain control over the Mojave Desert, Las Vegas, and the Hoover Dam. But I believe that according to the Fallout TV show, there are many clues pointing to the fact that Mr. House is the canon winner of this conflict and currently has major control over the Mojave Desert. The complete collapse of the NCR between the video game and the TV show is a huge sign of them not winning the conflict around New Vegas, because losing the conflict would have put them in a weakened position and been the first domino of their downfall.
No need to worry about the general, by the way. He'll be held responsible, publicly disgraced. 36.5% probability of suicide, by my estimate. Kimball won't be able to save him. He'll be too busy getting thrown out of office. 36.5% probability of suicide, by my estimate. Kimball won't be able to save him. He'll be too busy getting thrown out of office. But less than a 3% chance of suicide, mind you.
Because they were in a weakened state already, the destruction of Shady Sands, their capital city, essentially pushed them over the edge. Hank McClain, of course, was behind this, as stated in the TV show. He is playing out Vault-Tec's strategy of destroying any competition, so only they and their allies can be in control. As a side note, there are a few things about the fall of the NCR that are a bit fuzzy. For example, why was the Brotherhood of Steel at the location after Shady Sands was destroyed? Considering they were an enemy of the NCR, they had literally zero presence in NCR territory. Also, the NCR has a vast territory and a population of about 1 million people. They are the largest faction in the entire USA wasteland, and they are one of the most prosperous, free, and stable factions in the Fallout universe. This is the reason Hank's wife Rose wanted to live here with her kids. So this kind of contradicts the idea that they were on the verge of collapse and just needed a single terror attack to push them over the edge. So is it possible that the destruction of their capital would cause a complete collapse of the entire country? This doesn't make complete sense to me, and I feel like there's more to the story of their downfall, so hopefully we get filled in on this in later seasons. But either way, all signs point to the fact that they must have lost the battle over the Mojave Desert. On another point, if Caesar's Legion had somehow won the war in Las Vegas, they would have destroyed anything associated with House and New Las Vegas. Las Vegas represents everything that they hate and despise. So the fact that New Las Vegas is still standing and shown at the end of the show means that they must have not conquered the area. Plus, Mr. House being around is the only reason that Hank McClain would go to this area in the first place. He would probably still see Mr. House as an ally, even hundreds of years later.
Mr. House's Juratron army took control of Hoover Dam and the Strip, pushing both the Legion and the exhausted NCR out of New Vegas.
Is House an individual entity just working for himself, as shown in the video game, or is he a part of something much larger, as shown in the TV show? We will just have to wait until later seasons to see how they play him out. He will probably be somewhere in the middle, if I have to guess. But either way, I think it is pretty clear that he is the canon winner of Fallout New Vegas. But we will just have to wait until Season 2 to see if they confirm this or not. Thanks a lot, and have a wonderful day.
Vegas might see a dip in revenue for a few months, half a year. But soon enough, the tourists and their money will be pouring in. Vegas will be a shining jewel in the middle of the desert, an oasis of light, a beacon to show mankind the way to the stars.
Season 1 of Fallout is great, wonderful, fantastic even, and one of the reasons is the attention to detail and care put into this thing. Fans of the games are going to be eating it up because there is a buffet of video game references, Easter eggs, teases, and so much more. So in this video, we're going to be covering every little thing we found. Obviously, there is a blurred line between what's simply an in-world reference and what is an Easter egg, but honestly, we're going to be talking about it all. Just deal with it. So do all the things like like, subscribe, grab a Pip-Boy, suit up, load up on chems, and we hit the wasteland. Kicking things off, the opening scene showcases Cooper Howard, a renowned movie star in the Fallout world, whose movie posters were actually recently added to Fallout 76 in one of their latest updates. Anyway, he's sporting the same blue and yellow colors that Vault-Tec decided to use for their patented Vault jumpsuits. The song playing in this opening is Orange Colored Sky by Nat King Cole, a subtle nod to what eventually happens in this opening scene, but this song was also featured in a TV advertisement for Fallout New Vegas, and later was added to the radio stations in Fallout 4 and 76. Cooper mentions his horse's name is Sugarfoot, a nod to the real-life Western TV show by the same name. Heck, Cooper's outfit and persona are also like a retro version of this show's main character, Tom Sugarfoot Brewster. On the television set, there's various ads for Nuka-Cola, a staple to this world, essentially Coca-Cola, along with Sugar Bomb cereal. It then switches to a Saturday morning cartoon of Grognak the Barbarian, this world's version of the 90s cartoon Conan the Barbarian. Grognak is also featured in various magazines in Fallout 4 that could raise your barbarian stat, whereas the title of this episode is Grognak and the Ruby Ruins, which is actually one of the Pip-Boy games you can play in Fallout 4. Later on, you can actually find a unique weapon in a comic store called... episode is Grognak and the Ruby Ruins, which is actually one of the Pip-Boy games you can play in Fallout 4. Later on, you can actually find a unique weapon in a comic store called Grognak's Axe. When we first meet Lucy, she is the embodiment of Rosie the Riveter with her wrench and all. We are then quickly shown a classroom featuring the 14-star flag, first appearing in the original Fallout game, with the stars standing for the commonwealths that make up the USA. The Vault Boy images around the room are also the same art style and designs from the 76 or Fallout 76's perk card system. Lucy talking with the Vault Council is basically her taking her stats, or I guess listing off her stats, much like the Fallout games start with the player assigning their stats or perks before hitting the wasteland. This movie shows up and is referenced several times, but Lucy and Hank are watching the same Cooper Howard movie that is being filmed in the opening of Episode 3. The War and Peace book is a clever foreshadowing of what Vault-Tec had been planning this whole time, hoping for a war and then peace. Yeah, good try. Lucy's brother Norm, though, is playing the Pip-Boy game Atomic Command from Fallout 4, which is basically a rip-off version of Missile Command from 1980. A familiar Vault Boy bobblehead is shown front and center, being sought after items in the games, as they can help increase your stats or perks or give permanent bonuses to the sole survivor player. I'm not going to point out every piece of art I see and what it references to, but this one behind Lucy is the Iron Fist perk card from Fallout 76. Maybe a stretch, but Lucy's husband from the triannual Vault trade is named Monty, of which there is a character by the same name of Monty that's mentioned in Fallout 4, and he is affiliated with Raiders, so it could be him, because this series does take place only 9 years after those events. Lucy's Pip-Boy detects radiation with the same familiar sound effect from the games. Upon opening the first aid kit, Lucy heals herself with a stim pack, a mainstay for the games to aid the player character after they've lost some health. The weapon Lucy uses appears to be a sleek Vault Dweller version of the dart gun, or rather, syringer rifle from Fallout 4, that, you guessed it, it launches various syringes at enemies. There's a Don't Lose Your Head poster, which is a multi-layered, subconsciously telling Lucy to keep her cool, but also foreshadowing the eventual mission of transporting Will Zig's severed head. This is also a subtle Easter egg for Fallout Shelter, the mobile game, referring to a weekly quest called Game Show Gauntlet, where players are asked multiple questions, and if incorrect, they confront raiders and try not to, quote, lose their head. The raider takes a hit of Jet, an addictive hallucinogenic chem, giving the user a rush of energy and heightened strength, for a brief amount of time. Once the Vault 33 projector goes out, the wall is projected with the familiar "Please stand by" screen used in many of the games, both in-game and promos, amongst other things. We're first introduced to Maximus, currently sided with the Brotherhood of Steel. Now, Maximus's name could be a hint of where we see him in the future, with the origin of the name being a military title to honor successful commanders, which at the end of this series could be the future path of Maximus. Further exploring the Brotherhood of Steel, the red flag they run up the pole is the new California style of flag, while the father later is sporting what looks to be an insignia from the Lost Hills featured in Fallout 1 and 2. The Squires are also sporting their official maroon Squire outfits, first appearing in the games. The relic that Maximus is asked to identify is circuitry item, essentially a crafting item in the games used for high-tech weapon modifications, hinting at the Brotherhood of Steel wanting nothing but power with these older relics before the Great War. This Brotherhood of Steel airship is the Caswinin, not to be confused with the Prudwin, that is, I think, accessible in Fallout 4 when you're working with them, with the Brother of Steel, and you can use it to fly around the map, fast travel, essentially. The power armor model that the Brotherhood uses is the T-60 power armor. They mention other models here or there before the Battle of Anchorage, and this is the model featured heavily or most prominently in Fallout 4 and 76. Of course, this wouldn't be Fallout without a Nuka-Cola machine. Essentially, the Coca-Cola, like I said, it's the Coca-Cola of this world, but its pop caps are what are used as the currency in this world. While the power armor is stored using a power armor station, something that can be crafted and later used to upgrade and modify your player's power armor in various games. Once Lucy is outside of Vault 33, we can see that she is in California, specifically at the Santa Monica Pier, because of the ruined Ferris wheel, which this location shows up in the original Fallout game, but only on the map. You can't actually access it. Shout out to Indiana Jones, though, in the Crystal Skull for teaching little Maximus. Shout out to Indiana Jones, though, in the Crystal Skull for teaching little Maximus to hide in a refrigerator if there is a nuclear explosion. Best scene of the whole movie, I said it, folks. Dane can be seen reading a magazine, and this is actually the Guns and Bullets issue number 6, The Moon, a Communist Doomsday Device, one of the various magazines in Fallout 4 that will increase your critical damage for any ballistics gun. The giant bags easily are my favorite addition to this Fallout series because this is supposed to be a cheeky visualization of how you purposely use your companion characters as essentially pack mules, picking up weapons, armor, scrap, and forcing them to comically carry around like 150 pounds for you. The mug drawings of Wilzig and the dog are in the same art style as the Total Hack magazines from Fallout 4. One of the criminals digging up the ghoul is rocking the Junk Jet, a unique weapon from Fallout 4 that jets junk. That's about it. It also makes an appearance in Philly when Lucy is looking at the store's inventory, and funny enough, it has a price of 285 caps, which is the same value of the weapon in Fallout 4. The ghoul, or rather Cooper Howard, has a lot of Western movie influences kind of surrounding him, with this standoff with these criminals that dig him up, taking inspiration from the good, the bad, and the ugly. Although this puppo at the Enclave is named CX-202, it's a reference to Dogmeat, the dog you meet in Fallout 4 at the Red Rocket gas station, which almost beat for beat happens later in Episode 7, I believe it is that episode, with the ghoul rescuing CX-202 from the freezer. Also, you know, like dogs and red rockets, it's all a joke, haha, comedy. The guard outside of the Enclave is holding what looks like a laser rifle because of the stock, and I'm saying it's actually the custom Righteous Authority laser rifle that you can acquire in Fallout 4. In this scene, you can also see a monster hand slip from underneath the sheet, which is no doubt a super mutant experiment, probably using the forced evolutionary virus developed by Westtech. The brain in the jar has got to be an early experiment or update to the Robo-Brains that we get to see later in Vault 31. Essentially, it was a way to extend the lifespans of civilians and were used in various military settings. Wilzig and CX-202 have to avoid a machine gun turret when escaping the Enclave, a standard stationary turret that's a major headache, or could be later crafted and used as a defense measure. As Lucy is continuing her exploration of the wasteland, she stumbles across a run-down and rusted Assaultron. I hated these in Fallout 4, as they were originally used in the front lines of military, probably around the time of the Great War. Rad Roaches make a few cameos throughout the series, and Wilzig nails their description. They are mutated cockroaches, so no thank you, but you could eat them, you could eat the meat and regain some health, but then you definitely got some radiation, so the more you know. I forgot to mention these earlier, but Maximus and Knight Titus are flying on a Brotherhood of Steel Vertibird, originally used as U.S. military gunships and military transports. There are a lot of Fallout food logos that, make cameos throughout this series. We already talked about Nuka-Cola and Sugar Bombs. Here, though, Wilzig opens up a can of Cram. Our real-life version is Spam. Lucy drinks from a purified water bottle, the same exact design from the games. Big Boss cigarettes are featured in Ma's shop, along with an advertisement for a Braxo cleaner. At the campsite, Lucy is munching on some yum deviled eggs. In the Super Duper Mart, there is a baggie of Radaway on the coffee table, and in the abandoned overseer office, there's glue. I love this because it was always a prominent crafting supply in the games. Another beloved weapon, or I guess hated, depends who you talk to, the big ol' ugly assault rifle from Fallout 4, with a few different customizations or modifications on it, which instantly gets chomped up by the Yaogwa, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, essentially an irradiated bear of the wastelands, and is quickly dispatched by Maximus using what looks like a variant of the Crusader pistol from Fallout 76. Amongst the vendors in Philly, Lucy walks by a vendor claiming to sell dog meat, another nod to the Puppo from Fallout 4, but he also claims to be selling iguana, another food staple to the wasteland, and a little sign that mentions sting wing meat, a mutated version of a scorpion fly, and a pile of what looks like Brahmin meat, of which we actually see a live version of this later, essentially a cow, but it has two heads. A little behind the scenes info, but Jonathan Nolan mentioned that the viewer's introduction to Philly is supposed to be intended to generate similar feelings to players' first introduction to Megaton in Fallout 3, juxtaposing the pre- and post-apocalyptic worlds. During the ghoul shootout at Philly, he basically uses the Vault-Tec assisted targeting system, aka VATS, which is a system that allows players specifically to target weak spots on enemies and dispatch them that way. And yes, I know, the ghoul doesn't have a Pip-Boy, but come on, he's targeting specific limbs, and the slow motion sequence of following the bullets to their targets. The ghoul is also packing some heat because those are explosive rounds. In the chaos of this firefight, other company logos can be seen, such as CMR, a transportation company in this world, Robco Industries, a robotics and software company, and Poseidon Energy, a energy company ranging from your typical gas stations all the way up to oil rigs. There are a half dozen things in Maj in this world, Robco Industries, a robotics and software company, and Poseidon Energy, a energy company ranging from your typical gas stations all the way up to oil rigs. There are a half dozen things in Ma's shop. First thing I noticed was a half dozen gas stations all the way up to oil rigs. There are a half dozen gas stations all the way up to oil rigs. There are a half dozen things in Ma's shop. First thing I noticed was this magazine on the counter, looking similar to Grognak issue 19, What Sorcery This? On the desk, there is a copy of issue 19, What Sorcery This? On the desk there is a copy of Wasteland Survival Issue 4, the Scrapyard Home Decoration Guide. There's a copy of Tales of Junktown Jerky Vendor Issue 4 on the wall, and later there is another copy of Wasteland Survival Guide Issue 2, Insect Repellent Special. Other things in Ma's shop is there's a mini nuke in the glass case when the ghoul wanders in, and there is a poster of Mr. Pebbles in the background, the first cat in space, allegedly. I'm not supposed to say that, that's what my lawyer said. This is a great one, though. So the brand of robotic limb that they shove on Will Zig's foot is called Jim's Limbs. Nice rhyming, I love it. But this is a nod to the big Jim weapon that's just a wrench. The special ability of this is called Jim's Limbs. Nice rhyming, I love it. But this is a nod to the big Jim weapon that's just a wrench. But the special ability of this wrench is that it has a 20% chance to cripple the enemy. This is perfect, no notes, I love this Easter egg. The heads-up display of Maximus's power armor showcasing the same vitals as are shown to the players of the games when they get into the power armor. The integrity of the suit, fusion core levels, so forth. The tool Lucy has to use on Will Zig is a variation of the Ripper tool from the games, a small handheld clipper chainsaw tool. Funny enough, his severed head is a nod to the Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel side mission Vault Zero, where a severed head of a scientist has to be used as a quest item. The phrase Cooper mentions like 5 times is a reference to John Wayne yet again.
As the old Mexican used, feo fuerte y formal,
which translates to ugly, strong, and dignified, something Wayne originally wanted written on his own gravestone. The giant salmon-colored creature we learn is a genetically altered human, but the ghoul refers to it as a gulper or a glooper, which are big, old, slimy, gecko-like creatures that you will definitely run into in the Wasteland. Back in the vault, when the one vault member mentions that the water chip is broken, this is the same design as the water chip from the original Fallout game, but is also extremely clever because the events of that game start with the malfunction of a water chip forcing the player to find a new chip. The billboard the ghoul shoots is pretty cheeky because the Vault Boy is standing next to a clock, as in time is running out for these sales, get a vault now. But in reality, it's symbolizing the doomsday clock and how close the world was to dropping the bombs. Vault Tech, you sneaky bastards. Another sneaky Vault Tech thing is that when someone asks, does this really protect against radiation, referring to the Vault Tech jumpsuit, it's funny because it does, but it definitely does not, because in the games it only has +10 radiation protection. The other ghoul that the ghoul knows mentions that he's been like this for somewhere around 28 years. A nice reference to the 28 Days, Weeks, Years movie trilogy with 28 days later, 28 weeks later, and the upcoming 28 years later. Another corporation reference is the Super Duper Mart, your stereotypical supermarket in this world, using the logo and coloring from Fallout 4 rather than the drab-looking design from Fallout 3. The Pick a Job that's special to you banner in Vault 33 is the same design and format as the perk card selection in Fallout 76. Inside of the Super Duper Mart, all of the ghouls in the freezer are a reference to a side mission in Fallout 4 called Kid in the Fridge, which has a lot of the same elements that are featured here. Obviously, there's a kid that's stuck in the fridge, and then you are given the option to return him home, or sell him essentially into slavery, much like these ghouls. Lucy's new get-up shows she's slowly adapting to the Wasteland, while also looking like the Wastelander's armor set found in Fallout 4. The ghoul takes a break to enjoy some chems and television, with the TV brand being Radiation King. This appears in the world, the games, they also make other electronics, but this brand is actually a reference to The Simpsons, first appearing in Season 6, Episode 10, released in 1994. Apparently this was a purposeful inclusion by Leonard Boyarsky, solely to make Tim Kaine laugh, both original creators of Fallout. While the movie the ghoul watches is The Man from Dead Horse, again a reference reference to older westerns, but Dead Horse may be a reference to the Dead Horses, a tribe that was originally located at Dead Horse Point on the Colorado River. Lucy talks about power armor and mentions that this model was put into use after the Battle of Anchorage, something that the games featured in the opening of Fallout 4 and could be accessed via a simulation in Fallout 3 with the add-on of Operation Anchorage. This was a war between the US and China over control of Alaska back in 2066 that took roughly a decade, leading right up to the Great War of 2077. On the chalkboard for voting day, there is a picture of Betsy Ross, who created the second official US flag, and that the 14-star flag of Fallout uses as a template before the Great War broke out. When crossing the bridge with the two raiders, Maximus mentions that they are fiends. Now, at first I thought he just meant that they were bad, monsters even, but this is a reference to the chem-based raider group by the same name, located mainly on the outskirts of New Vegas. Shady Sands is heavily featured in this series, and they pretty much give you the gist of it, as it was the best attempt at rebuilding, becoming the capital of New California Republic, featured in Fallout 1 and 2. And we now know that Vault-Tec was behind its destruction. Matt Berry plays a Sebastian Leslie, one of Cooper's Hollywood buddies, who we realize sold his voice rights to the Mr. Handy robot. But when flirting with the party workers, he recites he is Bartholomew Codsworth III, which Codsworth is the name of the Mr. Handy robot you first meet in Fallout 4. When Lucy takes a glance at the New California Republic flag, the iconic main theme song from Fallout 4 plays. The scientist in Vault 4 grabs a harpoon or spear gun, which is no stranger to the series, but this doesn't look like the models in Fallout 4 or the DLC Far Harbor or even 76. This looks like the simple spear gun from Fallout Tactics. The Cap Farmers in the opening of Episode 7 were wearing the NCR Ranger combat armor that is the same armor featured on the cover of Fallout New Vegas, which, hint, hint, is where this series ends, showcasing New Vegas skyline on the horizon, featuring the Lucky 38 Resort and Casino. The snake oil salesman is like any sleazy vendor you meet in the wasteland, but him fixing a foot or growing back a limb is actually casually mentioned in Episode 2. But these chems that result in ghoulification ties in with John Hancock from Fallout 4, making himself a ghoul, just like Thaddeus, whereas most other ghouls get it away from natural radiation. The poster behind Reg in the back is the astonishingly awesome Tales Issue 6, Attack of the Fishmen from Fallout 4. But even funnier, in the game when you're actually looking for the magazine, it is found on the back of a toilet. I forgot about this one, but a Fallout lunchbox can actually be seen in Ma's shop on the table behind Lucy. In the games, these were fun little almost boxes that have a wide variety of different supplies in them. Another magazine is spotted in Cooper's home, the Tesla magazine number 7 from Fallout 4, which these game magazines would actually boost the player's energy weapon. I already mentioned Thaddeus using Ghoul. When he is shot with an arrow, he displays the effects of the ghoulish perk, granting lost HP to the character when irradiated. Speaking of perks, Norm's because he hacks into the Overseer's computer using the same jump selection screen from the games. Honestly, this is maybe my favorite game reference that I figured out. I love the Anakin and Palpatine scene between Maximus and the father or High Priestess. It just feels very sinister, power-hungry situation that we know is not going to end well. The meeting of the Minds, or Vault-Tec, and the cabal of other corporations running this world start to throw out ideas of experiments that they want to run in various vaults. And these are in fact pulled straight from the games. Vault 87 was the vault used to create super mutants, something that we mentioned at the Enclave earlier in Episode 2. Vault 51 had an AI overseer via a CAC computer. Vault 27 was purposely overcrowded. Vault 102 106, psychoactive drugs released into the air filtration system after the vault was sealed, resulting in a destroyed vault and only leftover insane survivors. And Vault 29 was the vault that was run by children, whereas their parents were being disclosed. All of these are big wigs in their own, respect, but the one Fallout fans will be interested in the most is the head of Roboco Industries, Robert House, one of the main antagonists from Fallout New Vegas. The frozen corpse or cryo chambers are no stranger to the Fallout franchise, but does tie in with the opening of Fallout 4, where their sole survivor characters placed in these once entering the vault and closed without them actually knowing what this is. Outside of Vault Tech in the background, you can see a Protectron robot used from construction all the way to simple office tasks, sweeping the front steps. Barb Howard. Now think about it, I'm curious if the name Howard is a Todd Howard, producer, director, pretty much everything I've ever read in this Fallout series. I'm getting off topic, but Barb mutters the phrase, "War never changes," which has been a staple of how almost all of the Fallout games have started.
War never changes. War never changes. War never changes. War never changes. War never changes.
Hank's pin code that Moldover needs for the cold fusion activation is 101097, which is the original release date of the first Fallout game. Also, Moldover is using a laser pistol when the fusion shows up. And lastly, we hit the Mojave Desert, one of the main areas in Fallout New Vegas, where we see a Deathclaw skull, scary-ass monsters of the wasteland that were originally genetically engineered creatures developed by the U.S. military to replace humans during close combat search and destroy missions. Season 2, you better have these lizard boys! So that is everything we found in this Fallout series. There is a lot packed in here, and I love the care and attention to detail of everything. I mean, the small nods, references, and Easter eggs are a great addition to this already solid story, and maybe the best video game to screen adaptation we've gotten, or at least it was by far my favorite. Let me know in the comments what were some of your favorite Easter eggs and references, along with maybe some things that we definitely missed, because I know for a fact that I did not find everything. There's probably some obscure, weird, obtuse thing that I would love to hear about. So again, list off everything you thought in the comments. A massive thank you though to everyone who watched this video. This was a video. And like, as it really helps me out. And if you want to help the channel even further, check out all of my other social medias listed on screen and in the description. I'm getting all mush mouth right now. Honestly, I'm on every platform. It's obnoxious. So, yeah. Thank you again for watching, and peace out. Bye-bye.
You guys are dumb niggers. Let's slit your throats.
Hello there, my name is the Lone Vault Wanderer. To celebrate the launch of the new Fallout show on Prime Video, the fine folks at Vault Tech have commissioned me to create this Wasteland Survival Guide. If you ever find yourself in the unfortunate situation of seeing a nuke dropped in the distance, don't panic. Simply raise your thumb, and if the cloud is smaller than your thumb, run away. However, if it's bigger, all you need to do is pull out an even bigger thumb, and you'll be just fine. Next up, be sure to equip your Robco Pip-Boy at all times. These handy little devices have an inbuilt Geiger counter, allowing you to detect radiation and help you...
Season 1 of Fallout is great, wonderful, fantastic.
Fallout lore.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Yo, yeah.
They really give it a 9?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what he told me. He was like,
They're like, this is like up there, best video game adaptation. It's like, it's so exciting.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
I kill you, fucking nigger. I slit your goddamn throat. Yeah, I agree with him. I'm gonna cut your fucking
was
throat.
going to be you filling out a sheet.
Zombie nigger.
This would have determined your traits, but as we know, that is not done, and it's done in the menu in the game. But maybe the medical history is just a reference to this piece of cut content. Kasumi is a human. Kasumi Nakano is a refuge in Arcadia in the year 2080, who is led to believe that she is a synth who has replaced the real Kasumi. She really doesn't have any evidence that she is a synth, other than the fact that the only real memory that she has is waking up in a white room and feeling a jolt of electricity on the back of her head while being by mysterious people.
Listen, do you have any clue that you're actually a synth, little thing? Dreams of waking up in a lab? Years I can't remember from when I was a kid? Not to mention how I never quite fit in back at home.
And other than those memories, there really isn't any evidence to suggest that
over
she
here,
is a
nigger.
synth. When Kasumi does not draw and when talking to the Institute scientists about her, they say that there's no synth with that personality that they know of.
There's still the issue of this girl, Kasumi. She thinks she's a synth.
I can tell you that she's not. Synth, obviously she belongs to the Institute, but I have no record of an asset deployed with that identity. I suppose it's possible that someone else meddled with Institute property. Certainly wouldn't be the first time. I'm sorry, I can't tell you more. If you can verify that she's one of ours, let me know, alright?
So is she a synth? Probably not, but there's probably more to that backstory than meets the eye. Psychers. The term Psychers originated back in Fallout 1. After the Master gained his psychic powers, he wanted to give this ability to his followers, so he did some experiments with SCP and created 4 successes. Those successes were Wiggum, Gideon, Lucy, and more. They were cast beyond a force field and given psychic nullifiers to alleviate any suffering stemming from their ability. And the term Psyker may have started in Fallout 1, but it definitely did not stop there. In Fallout 2, we have Melchior, who can summon FEVPs, and Hakunin, who is a Dreamwalker. In Fallout 3, we have Bloomseer Poplar, who can see into the future, and Professor Calvert, who is able to project his thoughts into the minds of others. In Fallout New Vegas, we got the Clairvoyant Forecaster, and in Fallout 4, we got Mama Murphy. So there are plenty of people in the Fallout universe who technically have psychic powers. I'm glad they didn't put too much emphasis on this, but just enough to make it interesting. Wanamingo Origins. The Wanamingo is one of the many mutant creatures in Fallout. There is an East Coast and a West Coast version. The West Coast version we can see in Fallout 2 and are mainly found in North California, while the East Coast version are going to be slightly different and found throughout Appalachia. And not too much is really known about their origin. But in Fallout 2, the Wanamingos were originally tied to a bunch of cut content, specifically a cut EPA location. Or, well, that's what its earlier version was called. It was eventually renamed to the Environmental Protection Agency. And originally, there was a heavily toxic lake that was explicitly mentioned as being a catalyst for many mutations, including things like the floaters and centaurs. So maybe early on in Fallout 2's development, this would have been the origins for the Wanamingos. Also in the Fallout Bible, which I should say again is non-canon, but in the Fallout Bible, Chris Avalon, who did not really like the idea of the Wanamingos, specifically states that they are a product of pre-war FEV experiments, intended to be a genetically engineered creature that would be unleashed in enemy territory, with an unusually long but not infinite lifespan, and they even put a genetic dead man switch in them to keep them from excessively breeding. And it seems like for Fallout 3, they were at least toying around with the idea of having them in, because in some of the concept art for Fallout 3, we can see some mock drawings for the Wanamingos. So what is the origins of these creatures? We don't really know 100%, but there are still many theories out there. Vault Zero. Vault Zero is a location in Fallout Tactics, which is otherwise known as the Calculator's Lair, that can be reached from Cheyenne Mountain. And unlike most vaults that had an experiment, Vault Zero was not that. It was dug deep beneath the Cheyenne Mountain and was by far one of the largest underground vaults, and was intended to be the epicenter of the Vault network. Vault Zero was the place where all the geniuses of the pre-war United States would be kept in cryogenic stasis. The brains were to be extracted and frozen for the duration of their stay in the vault, and they were all hooked up together to one big supercomputer called the Calculator. And due to budget cutbacks by the Department of Defense, several important backup systems were not included in the Neuralink systems. This caused the Calculator to become corrupted, and instead of releasing robots to help make the way safer for humanity, robots began exterminating all life. And all the geniuses that were still plugged in, majority of them suffered brain damage, dementia, and cognitive defects from a combination of old age and prolonged exposure to radiation. And during the game of Fallout Tactics, Vault Zero would serve as the end-game setting, where the player character and a team of Brotherhood Steel Paladins would fight their way to the Calculator's chamber. Now, Fallout Tactics, I guess, would technically be considered a spin-off series, so take all that with what you will. Bill Calhoun. When you think of Caesar's Legion, the first names that probably come to mind are Caesar, Joshua Graham, Legate Linius, something like that. But Bill Calhoun probably isn't one of them. Bill was one of the followers who studied the dialect of the tribes in the region of Canyon, where he was partnered with Edward Salo, who is, as we know, Caesar. On their journey, that's when they would meet the Mormon missionary Joshua Graham. After reaching the Grand Canyon, the three of them would have peaceful discussions with the Blackfoot tribe, until Graham would make a mistranslation and incite the Blackfoots, resulting in them being captured and held for ransom. But during all this time, the tribe was at war with 7 other tribes, and they were ultimately going to lose. And Caesar, not willing to get destroyed along with them, and against his wishes of his companions, used his knowledge and education under the followers to train this tribe. And with all of his knowledge, he would very quickly rise through the ranks and become their leader. And soon after this, he would form the Legion with Joshua Graham. But instead of killing Calhoun, Caesar let him live and sent him back to the followers to inform them of the recent events, and to warn them to not interfere with the expansion of his new empire. And really the only other depiction that we get of Bill Calhoun is on the Legion money. On the denarius, one side has a bust of Caesar, while the other one will picture Caesar, Joshua, and Bill. So even though he wasn't a direct founder of the Legion, he definitely played a hand in it. Ghost in Baja. I believe we've talked about this in a previous iceberg, so I will make this quick. When talking to Ranger Hanlon, he will throw out this line.
It's no secret we've had better campaigns. Holding this whole length of river isn't easy. We're stretched thin and the long 15 just keeps getting longer. Slow to get supplies, slower to get reinforcements. NCR's Senate has got funds tied up at the Boneyard. And President Kimball ordered our most experienced rangers to chase ghosts down at Baja.
And this led a lot of people to believe that rangers were chasing, like, actual ghosts or some sort of mysterious figure out in Baja, when he obviously just meant that they were chasing, like, dead ends in Baja, but that's still not going to stop the Fallout community from doing its thing. Lost Fort Abandoned Design Docs. The Fort Abandoned design docs were from Fallout Van Buren, which, as we know, was eventually cancelled. And these docs were written by Chris Avallone and outlined the content which would have appeared in Fort Abandoned. And these documents were anonymously given to a Fallout historian, I hope I pronounced his name right, Anna Charit? Anna? I'm just going to call her Anna. With the request that she publish it to the Nukipedia on November 9th, 2023. On April 3rd of the following year, she took all the documents down, citing it was a request by those who had originally given her permission. But once something has been on the internet, it is always on the internet. And using the Wayback Machine, we can still find some images of these leaked documents. Fort Abandoned, originally known as Fort Aradesh, was a destroyed military base that belonged to the NCR. The fort was destroyed by Caesar's Legion forces, reducing the Republic's control over the frontier. And the name Fort Abandoned was applied to it after the NCR withdrew its forces. And the original plan was to have the player character, if they choose so, to slowly upgrade the fort into a center of prosperity. And in New Vegas' Lonesome Road, we can actually get a reference to this fort.
I've walked the east. You've walked the west. More than I have. Circle Junction, Reno, Vault City. Word a few at Fort Ardash. Fort abandoned. Even further west than that. Ramen drives on the Big Circle.
Pam caused the Great War. One of the many questions in the Fallout universe is who exactly caused the Great War? There are so many theories floating around, but there's really no 100% definite answer on who exactly caused it. And I kind of like that. I like having the mystery. I don't really ever want to know who caused it because I feel like, in my opinion, it would kind of break the whole meaning of Fallout. But one of the many theories floating around is that Pam, the predictive analytic machine that is currently being used by the Railroad, actually caused the Great War. Pam was originally commissioned in 2067 under the PAM initiative. This was a joint project between the Defense Intelligence Agency and the military to develop an advanced AI, capable of predicting the future. And with access to a massive database, Pam was able to make some predictions. But she did have a problem with the human factor, and in a bid to remove the human element from her calculation,
him back.
to join the Legion. Had the positions been reversed, Caesar would be dead. Linnaeus is called the Monster of the East because he never, ever shows mercy.
Linnaeus, butcher, monster, terror of the East. Not even his slaves have seen his face. Struck them blind so they can't. Wears a mask. Don't even know if it's the same man. He put Colorado to the sword. Broke the hangdogs by throwing their hounds upon the flames, so they might burn forever in the afterlife.
And a lot of this backstory has to account with no one really seeing his face. Why does he have the mask, and why would he strike his personal slaves blind so they can't see him? Maybe so that way no one can actually see his face to know that it's not the same person. And one of the biggest pieces of evidence is the fact that Joshua Graham claims to not know him.
I think only Caesar can lead the Legion. I've never met anyone who could take his place. I couldn't. I never had a mind for logistics. I don't know Linnaeus, but from what I've heard, he has no interest in leading anyone, unless it's in battle.
Despite the fact that all of these legends that were rising about the Legate would have definitely happened during the time that Graham was the Legate. And the thing that really nails it in the head for me is that we already have a couple references to the Princess Bride in Fallout New Vegas, with the rodents of unusual size, and the challenge, I am not left-handed, which is of course a reference to Inigo Montoya's line when he has a sword fight with the Man in Black. And if you haven't seen this movie, dude, check it out, it's actually really good. But in that movie, there is a character known as the Dread Pirate Robber. Princess Bride, so why wouldn't they take another aspect from it? So in my opinion, there's multiple Legate Linnaeuses. They just pick the strongest guy, the most beefcaked guy, and throw him as the poster boy. Alright, you know what, this is true. This theory is 100% true. I just said it. Fallout 4 Neutral Ending. I believe this is talking about the Minutemen ending that has you coexist with the Railroad and the Brotherhood of Steel, while also destroying the Institute, but evacuating all the scientists and synths. So technically with this ending, everyone would be alive and coexisting with each other. Now whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up for you to decide. Gabriel was a failed synth mind wipe. Gabriel is a synth that, with a little help from the Railroad, was able to have their mind wiped and start a new life. And that sounds good and all, until you realize that ended up leading him to become a raider. And not just any raider, he ended up becoming the leader of a raider group. And the reason it would be a failed synth mind wipe is because, according to some Institute terminals, the mind wiping technique is very dangerous, and it can harm the synth software and mix up their ideas of right and wrong. So technically, every time the Railroad mind wipes the synth, they end up with the possibility of getting the exact opposite of what they want. You get a synth that is already generally a pretty good person, there's a chance that the Railroad, well...
Be right back. Oh, you motherfucker. Hold on, guys.
While mind wiping them could.
Mike Hoggard, adrenochrome. Mike Hoggard, adrenochrome. Honestly, what he's talking about.
Somebody sent me a prayer request, and I copied and pasted it onto a text document ready to be printed out.
Oh, you fucking niggers. I'm gonna cut your
ready
fucking throats.
So,
I'm gonna cut your goddamn throats.
Amen?
Fucking
God knows
niggers.
who it was. And just pray. Yeah, it's ready to be printed out. So, God knows who it was. And I copied and pasted it onto a text document ready to be printed out. Yeah, it's ready to be printed out. So, as usual, I've got so many things on my mind. Somebody sent me a prayer request, and I copied and pasted it onto a text document ready to be printed out. Amen? God knows who it was. Just pray, whoever that was, Lord, would you help them and bless them? It is good to be here tonight. In all seriousness, I think we ought to pray for our country. We are a week away from our destiny in this country. And I'm not a prognosticator, I'm a lousy weatherman, but the pot is boiling in this country. Do you see that? Okay? And so just pray for our country. One of the flames that's under that pot is something going on in the military. That's when it gets scary. Because apparently there was a rescue mission initiated